Hi, I'm Stefan Kertes, and welcome to On Becoming a Healer. My co-host Saul Weiner and I recently got really curious about a rising number of videos, typically on YouTube, titled Why I Quit Medicine, or I Quit Medical School, or I Quit Forever. And reflecting on that, one video has over 15 million views. We're both still trying to make sense of it. Does it mean something only for the world of YouTube, or does it mean something that speaks to us in medicine or those of us who are trying to become doctors? Let me turn it over at this point to Saul Weiner and ask, why did you get interested in these videos, Saul?
Well, Stefan, of course, we all know about the incredible problem of burnout, and we know that people in medicine are unhappy, they're suffering. Suicide rates among physicians are higher than the general population for both men and women. We know that it got worse apparently during the pandemic. We don't actually have data, as far as I know, on whether people are actually quitting at higher rates. We know from surveys that they say they plan to quit, which is not quite the same. Clearly, interest in going into the field of medicine is still very high. So it's not like it's not like it's a vanishing profession. But the pain is real. And these videos really cover the gamut. They range from, on the one hand, people who are sort of transparently like YouTube personalities who are hawking something. The next video might be on why you should buy my handbags. And then there are others that are heart-wrenching. One thing that's interesting is just how popular these videos are. I mean, as you said, they tend to have huge numbers of comments, huge numbers of viewers, and they seem to be almost a genre. Now, it's not just medicine that has this genre. There are, why I quit being a lawyer. A lot of that you see on YouTube. But I will say that for medicine, it's a much bigger pool as far as I can tell. And then the other thing I think that's striking for me and that I'm hoping to talk about is after watching a bunch of them, I have some thoughts about what they're not discussing, what's missing from them that I think are important. I feel like there's something quite narrow about these in many ways, and there are some exceptions, but they focus very much on very concrete things like there's too much paperwork, I'm exhausted. But what seems to be not talked about very much is the nature of their relationships with patients, the way in which medicine is ultimately, at least in my view, somewhat of a calling. I know that sounds corny, but that there's something about needing a group of people who are there for their fellow humans who are suffering and hurting. And that is something kind of special and unique. And while the system is all messed up and riven by profit, that's something worth fighting for. And that kind of conversation seems to be missing. There's a much more of a sort of passive sense of all this horrible stuff is being done to us. I got to leave. So I kind of wanted to reflect a little bit about what we're seeing from looking at these videos, but also talk a little bit about what we're not seeing, what seems to be missing from the discourse, from the conversation that at least I'm seeing on social media about, what's wrong with medicine.
Before people assume that this is going to turn into just two Gen X physicians criticizing younger people who've put some things up on social media, I promise you it won't be that, because in watching many of these videos myself, I've often felt like the people who are speaking are wrestling with certain questions that are, to some extent, transcendent over time. Very often, the people making these videos are in their 20s and 30s, and they're asking, how do I decide what I want to be and what I want to do and who I want to be? And I think that's a universal question, and it doesn't end when you reach age 35 either. And I resonated in many ways, even when I realized I had made some very different choices with the kind of logic in these videos. I wonder if we could start off, Saul, with one that in many ways impressed both of us, which we know of as the Gooby and Dooby video.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways that's an outlier. Gooby started out, and that's the pseudonym he uses, in April of 2024, with just these nature videos. He didn't show his face. They were just these beautiful scenes of somebody who you couldn't see carrying a camera in the wilderness, walking his very cute little dog, who he calls Doobie. And often he would set the camera down. There'd be nature scenes. We'd be watching a lake or river for up to 10 hours. Presumably he was camping, but you didn't know. It was kind of mysterious. And then about 4 or 5 months into doing this, with just a few hundred people watching, maybe 1,000 or so, he turned the camera around on himself and he said something like, I used to be a neurosurgeon. And looks like he's in his late 30s. And then he tells this extraordinary story about why he quit medicine. And it's poignant. And there's something raw and unedited about everything that he does. It's almost like he's thinking out loud while he's looking at the camera, almost unaware that it's there. and he talks in heartfelt ways about how he felt that what he was doing as a physician was not something he was comfortable with, that he felt like what he was doing with patients and to patients wasn't really what they needed for the most part. That
Yeah.
the whole system was corrupt and that he just couldn't do it. It's quite a powerful video. And then from then on, he's had a very large following. He has about 500,000 subscribers. But I would say he's more of an outlier. By the way, he's dropped enough hints that I've been able to figure out who he is. And I heard one other influencer who's also a neurosurgeon talk about how she doesn't know who he is, and he was an extremely good neurosurgeon. And
Hmm.
so anyway, so that's Gooby.
Most of us think of neurosurgeons as people who operate on the brain, but actually they also operate on the back. He makes a big point about this because once he was in practice, a big part of what he did was talk to people who had back pain that wasn't getting better. And he would, do some diagnostic workup, start to do surgery on a number of these folks. And then some people, it seemed like they benefited or they needed that. He absolutely would agree that back surgery is sometimes necessary. He says that. And yet a fair number of people, things would get worse, 6 months after the surgery. And a reasonable number of people would contact him a few weeks before the surgery and say, I've kind of noticed that, my back doesn't bother me very much. I've made all these other changes in my life. I'm feeling better right now. Do you think I still need to have that operation? Of course, he would say no. And in his own exploration of people and how they recovered from pain, he came to find that a lot of things they did in their daily life, how they ate, their social life, how they took care of themselves, these were things that were really, really important. And a lot of what he was doing didn't seem to be too central to people's healing, with some notable exceptions. He always said there are exceptions. And it was draining on him because he said it's great to tell somebody they don't need surgery. And yet at the same time, it's a big problem for the healthcare system in which you work. When you set up to operate, that's a revenue unit and it punishes the practice and the hospital and everybody else when those surgeries don't get done. And as he's working, he apparently gained, he said 30 or 40 pounds. He wasn't feeling very good. He was really deeply into the processes by which people recovered, but he was not really very much part of their recovery. And gradually he came to the decision with his wife that even though it would be a big change, he was just going to quit altogether and take some time to figure out what he was going to do. And he spoke with real sensitivity about the fact that when he tells people he quit, he originally felt embarrassed himself, but gradually he felt free by virtue of saying he didn't know what he was going to do next.
Yeah, now I hope that Gooby goes back to medicine. He's not
Ah,
giving any indication that he will. And here's why. First of all, I do think that him stepping away is critical because he's doing some real soul searching. But look, we need people like that in medicine, and we need people like that in neurosurgery. Neurosurgery is a really important field. There are situations where a brain surgeon is critical. And in fact, it's interesting because I actually saw a comment on his feed by somebody who had been a former patient and said, I just want you to know that you were of great help to me.
I saw that
And
too.
yeah, and so I think that here, and this is again, it's not something he's talked about. I don't think he can return to medicine and do the right thing and still earn what a neurosurgeon currently gets. And he doesn't say what he earned, but it's a lot. And I think that's a kind of golden handcuffs. If you're going to make that kind of money, you have to generate a lot of money. And you're in a system that is basically holding you to account. And the hospital wants to make even more money. And so once you step on that treadmill, which is hard to get off because, as I said, you're making a lot of money. You have to be a machine. You have to operate and operate and operate. And you and I did another episode recently where we talked about how much in orthopedics, as an example, is proven to be ineffective and even harmful and is still being done and is in fact being done more and more. So I think that there is a complicity when we sign up and agree to play by the profit-driven rules where in return we get paid a lot, but we can't practice the way we want. In contrast, you and I talked, actually, it was way back in 2020 with a physician named John Scala who had broken away from the system, set up his own solo practice in
Yep.
middle America, in central Colorado, hires his own staff, is not connected to any corporate structure, earns less than most physicians, even in primary care, although what he earns is fine, particularly given where he's living. He has no complaints about his lifestyle. There's nothing he feels that he doesn't have, and feels fulfilled and rewarded, at least at the time when we talked to him after 20 years of practice, because he does it the way he wants to do it. And so I think that what I get from a lot of these videos and from the discourse is a sense that, oh, we physicians are trapped. We have no other choice. We're in this system
Hmm.
that is ruining us. And I think that also raises questions about the medical education environment and the training culture
Hmm.
that we bring people through that leaves them feeling very trapped and limited and unable to break out of a mold of sort of being, I would say, sheep in a sense. Excellent Sheep actually is the name of a book that was published some years ago about elite students. And I think that's something that I perceive when I watch these videos. Now, again, I don't want to be a scold. I think the suffering is real, particularly when we're talking about people ending their lives, people who are extremely burned out. Something is, the pain is real. But I think that there is something missing in the culture through which these students are passing. And of course, it's not a homogeneous group of people. If you and that's reflected in these
No.
videos.
And I want
And I
to
think it's worth talking about that.
so I want to plant a flag on a couple other things about Doobie that may be important as a point of comparison. First of all, his account of himself gave me the strong and overwhelming sense that he truly wanted to heal people and he wanted to understand how people got better. That at the heart of all things was that people were getting better often without surgery. And then he didn't want to be pushed in any way to do those surgeries. He really was genuinely interested in healing. That's what he cared about most. And he felt like the profession was at odds with that. And I saw in that video a person with the heart of a healer who really wants to heal. And then the second thing is that he wasn't a professional YouTuber. This is really going to be important as we talk about some of the others.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, just to put that in perspective, I agree. Just it was several years ago that a groundbreaking study was published in JAMA Psychiatry on pain reprocessing therapy for chronic back pain that showed that you could take, if you were a well-trained psychologist in this practice, you could take people with chronic lower back pain, and in a randomized controlled trial, you could profoundly benefit them in a relatively short time, and that these patients, 60 some odd percent of them were pain free after a few weeks of pain reprocessing therapy, and that the effects lasted even at a year compared to a control group. And obviously, that is not encouraging news for the industry that wants to make money doing back surgery.
Yeah.
But it's really important information for patients. And I think that's kind of what Gooby was getting at. He was saying, look, this kind of mechanistic approach isn't really what my patients need, and I can't do it anymore. But again, I would still say that leaving medicine entirely is not the only solution to that problem. I think it was necessary for him to step away. But like I said, I do hope he goes back in a completely different guise with a different approach to practice. But anyway, I think we should talk about what we see, not with him, but for many others.
I want to mention Life by Maggie. This is one I watched, which was called either Why I Quit Medicine or I Quit Medicine. And I tuned into it because I've been listening to several dozen of these, and I just was genuinely curious about why she left. And she proceeded to explain that she has been making a lot of videos all day. This one might be a little bit less organized because it was her sixth or seventh for the day. And she explained how she had put together a pretty steady income stream by a mixture of making high quality courses, some of which she started when she was a pre-medical student and then in medical school, how to get into medical school. And that these courses were well liked. People were paying for them. And she was doing work assisting others and making courses on YouTube. And that frankly, she was turning in a pretty good income now on YouTube through making videos. And I realized maybe about 2/3 of the way through that I actually had never heard as to why she quit medicine. Like it wasn't even about medicine. It was about the fact that she was making a good living as a video producer for YouTube. So that was a very different picture. A meaningful percentage of people are deciding between medicine and something else. If you're thinking about three different jobs and you try two out and you choose one of them, is there anything wrong with that?
No, many of the videos are people who basically just don't like what they discovered when they got into residency.
Hmm.
So they talked about how they were gunners all their lives. They wanted to be a doctor from a young age. They always tried to be the best in school. They broke their back as pre-meds to get the top scores. Once they got into medical school, they discovered that, to get into the top specialties, it's not good enough to just get great grades. You also have to do a lot of research. And so they did that too, and they cut out their social life, and they watched all their friends outside of medicine, making a good living. These were folks in banking, and they felt kind of envious. And then finally, they got to where they wanted to be, which might be, I don't know, orthopedics or dermatology or whatever it is. And it's just a grind. And I remember watching one video from somebody who has a big following who's an OB-GYN, and she talked about how she was just up all night just doing fetal monitoring, waiting to figure out when like some unstable pregnancy needed to be rushed to the operating room, and how she had to do a crash C-section just before her shift ended, and just like how it was just too much. And I'm watching that and saying, I get it, but at the same time, think about what she's doing for these women who are coming in to have the most important thing happen in their life, which is to bring a new child into the world. And they depend on people like her who have expertise and who are able to monitor moment by moment what's going on. Someone has to do that. And you can intervene with great skill and timeliness. And that's the wonder of medicine. And somehow she, because she's sort of in the middle of it, has kind of lost that sense and just sees it as a grind. And to me, I get it. When I was a resident, I remember the only thing that gave me joy was reducing the size of my service at
Yes.
times. I was just like, oh, thank God that person got discharged or went to the ICU or I must admit died. And that's what happens when you're in that kind of environment.
Right. The mill
But
takes over. You are in a mill, and the incentives of the mill come to govern your consciousness. When you discharge all your patients and you don't have to come in the next day, at least in my era, that was called winning the game.
Yeah, in fact, we actually went to a baseball game once when that happened. Only happened once in fourth year, but we went to a White Sox game. It was kind of
Oh,
a
I'm sorry, it's the
miracle.
White Sox.
Yeah, well, in some ways, it's the job of people like you and me who have the great privilege of being out of that experience. We're way past residency to talk about the big picture, to talk about the fact that there is something sacred and important in every society. We have to have healers. We have to have people who are there when you are in pain, when you're suffering, when you're delivering a difficult pregnancy, when you've been diagnosed with cancer. And I think also medical educators, so much of the emphasis is it just reinforces the efficient task completer mindset that we've talked about. Whereas I think that there has to be a real shift towards relationship centered training. That really everything about being a good doctor is about the relationship that you have with your patient. And the only way to give young physicians the tools to do that is through the relationship that we have with them. So much of the emphasis is on that craziness that some of
Hmm.
these residents talk about, where it's all about killing yourself to get top scores on the USMLE exam and pile on top of that the research projects and so forth. And they become fearful.
No, I hear you because we all know the ways in which we respond to incentives, and we all watch people respond to incentives. And so there's an element of truth there. At the same time, many of the people who are leaving medicine or are producing videos about leaving medicine are describing not just the system, but a calculus that they are engaged in themselves. And depending on the individual, I often wind up with pretty substantial respect for the calculus that they're engaged in themselves, because they're making an assessment of what works in life for them or how you make decisions in life. And I want to emphasize that I was not profoundly clear with myself about who I was or what I wanted to be when I was 20 or even 30. So I wouldn't want to assert that somehow today's generation should be any clearer than I was. And ultimately, we're going to come back around to how we want to handle these decisions. But there's a video I watched which struck me as quite logical, and it was by a now strong YouTube personality named Ali Abdal. And he has a video again called Why I Quit Medicine. And he attempted to analyze his own decision based on how we normally make decisions about what to do in life. So he kind of universalized it. He went beyond saying something was upsetting to him. And in fact, it sounded like he worked in the UK system. It sounded like he actually appreciated his colleagues and appreciated the work. He did not sound like someone who was in extraordinary distress as a doctor. But he said, look, why do we work? What is the point of work? There are really 4 or 5 basic factors that drive us to work and to choose a certain line of work. One is money, you have to acknowledge. In fact, some people argue that everything else that you do could also have other forms of impact, but you have to do work specifically so that you also get money in the process, unless you're in the exceptional class of independent. So you work partly for money. He says the other reason people normally would decide about work is for fun. It doesn't need to necessarily be fun in the moment of, ha ha, this is the funnest thing I've ever did. He uses the word fun. It could be pleasure. It could be enjoyment. The third he puts on the list as operational for many people making a decision, and certainly for him, is helping people. What does it mean to help people? Helping people overlaps with his fourth, which is purpose and meaning. He understands that every person finds purpose and meaning in a distinct way, but helping people is a big one. And he layers into that one very closely because he makes the following case about what was happening for him. He clearly had been making YouTube videos throughout his medical training. He was already had a following of sorts. He was probably gaining revenue, it sounded like. And he said, look, you can help people by doing a task for a person in front of you. You can also help people in some larger plane of activity. The most extreme example he would give is a stockbroker or a financier who says, I go to volunteer at the homeless soup kitchen once a month because I really like to help people. And the other times of my day, I am making oodles of money, millions and millions of dollars. And his point to the financier would be, you could do a lot more help simply by taking a percentage of the income that you're making and donating it to that exact organization that feeds people so they could hire a whole bunch of people and give out a whole bunch more food. Like if helping people is a goal, you can do more of that and do it more effectively by just taking the money you're making and doing it. Helping people also has an element that related in his talk to purpose and meaning. And the question there is, who am I to be doing this particular form of helping? And his assessment is, essentially, what would happen if I was not the one to be doing it? And he said, look, I was a doctor. I liked being a doctor. I liked the people around me. But I was aware of the fact that I wasn't inherently better than other people. There may be doctors out there who do a very unique kind of surgery and they're profoundly unique and they render a service that's unique. But if I were to step away from doctoring, and that's what I was thinking of doing, someone else would be right there to do exactly what I was doing. And they probably would do it about as well as I was doing it. Conversely, my YouTube channel and the videos that I make, not only do they make money, but I receive hundreds or even thousands of messages of feedback saying, thank you so much for the course that you had on YouTube or that I took through you. It helped me and my husband decide how to change our lives. It helped us realize how to change factors that would enable us to have children. He came to think that what he was doing in teaching on YouTube was irreplaceable and that no one else would step right into that role. Conversely, in medicine, what he was doing was not that unique. And so he had less of a sense of meaning from medical practice. And I don't think you can talk about Ali Abdaal's analysis as simply an indictment of the healthcare system or an indictment of the efficient task completer mindset, or can you? So I'll have at it.
Yeah, I think that the case that he makes is in some ways unimpeachable. It seems like he's thought about it and he's made a decision that works for him and may work well for other people. But as I listen to him, I'm thinking about a patient I saw just the other day in clinic. This was an 83-year-old man who lives in the Chicago Housing Authority buildings and came in because he had strained his back that morning trying to lift and move his bed so that the maintenance guys could get to the radiator. Apparently, it's a requirement every year that they have to come in and do certain types of maintenance, and it's his job to move his bed. And he lives alone. Apparently, his kids, I think, live in Tennessee. And he had hurt his back trying to do it. And the maintenance people showed up and they said, we're going to come back tomorrow. It's your job to move this bed. So he took the bus in to clinic. He was able to make it to the bus, climb up the steps into the bus, I think, which sounded like it was pretty painful. And when I saw him, he was obviously in a lot of pain, but there was no self-pity. He wanted me to give him something for the pain, and he planned to go back and move that bed. So I said to him, look, you can't move that bed. You got to find somebody to help you. Can you, maybe you could hire somebody? Because he said he was all alone. Or maybe ask the folks at the CHA housing if they could do it. He's like, no, it's in the lease. I got to do it. And then he said, look, I'm on a fixed income. I can't hire anyone to do this. And then I said, well, maybe we give you some ketorolac injection. No, I don't want any shots. Just give me some pills. And then I said, we have a physical therapist here who could actually see you. He's like, no, I don't have time for that. I got to get out of here. And so I was like, well, why do you have to go in such a hurry? And he said, well, I'm writing some letters I have to send. I'm like, what kind of letters are you writing? And he said, well, and he looked kind of proud. He said, I'm sending each of my kids, who would be adults at that point, $20. And I want to get those letters off. And I said, are they aware that you're in this situation where you've got, and he's like, no, I'm not telling them. They've got their own problems to deal with. And so the picture I got of this guy, first of all, I'm sitting here having this conversation with the guy, trying to figure out some solution. And it's very poignant. I mean, it meant a lot to me to have this exchange with this much older man living under very difficult circumstances who isn't asking for anything, who obviously is very proud. And I don't know, I wouldn't trade that for anything. And I felt like there was something, I felt moved by it. I felt extremely privileged. I can't say why, but very privileged to be able to have this kind of conversation with somebody across such a chasm in terms of the differences in our life. I was touched. So that, I guess, in some ways, that's my answer. That to me is, if somebody said to me, well, you probably didn't help this guy much, you
Yeah.
still ended up just giving him ibuprofen. Wouldn't it be better if you were like an investment banker and you made a ton of money and you donated that money to charity? I'd be like, God bless you, go do it if that's what you want to do.
Hmm.
But that's not me. And so I think that that's what I'm trying to get at here. I wish there was more conversation about the kind of connection, that the shared humanity that occurs between human beings when the doctor comes in and sits down and they have a toolkit. My toolkit is my medical training. I didn't get to take a lot out of that toolkit except for some ibuprofen, but I felt like I was present for this person, and that felt important. The other thing I think is that I think doctors are trained to feel interchangeable. There's something about the way in which we're trained
Hmm.
where there's this emphasis on, know the guidelines, follow the protocols, see patients quickly, and so forth. We talk about the burnout and the depression and the misery. And I think while everybody who describes that in these videos externalize it, they have a long list of things that they feel are wrong with medicine, and they're probably correct about all of them. Let's face it, I don't think that's why people are killing themselves. And look, in a lot of other professions, there's bureaucracy and paperwork, and it's riven by capitalism. I think there's something particularly tragic when you go into medicine and you have the idealism and you want to have these deep connections with patients, which I think is really behind a lot of what many people who are pre-meds and who seek a career in medicine are looking for. But something happens during that training where it's not reinforced, it's not cultivated. In some ways, it's squelched, and they end up unable to make those connections and maybe not even fully aware of what it is that they're supposed to do. And yet, at some level, they sense the lack of meaning. And I think that could cause despair. For me, those brief moments of connection with patients, I mean, the fact that I couldn't fix his bad back, that was okay. I mean, that was okay. And another thing I think is a lot of people who go into medicine set unrealistic expectations for themselves. They feel like, gosh, that was a total waste of time. This guy came in and I really couldn't help him with his back, and I have all this training and I can get to apply it, and what's the point? And I can't fault them for that, because the way we're trained, we're left thinking like, oh gosh, I'm so smart, I learned all this stuff, and yet I'm not helping people, and besides, I'm not even giving enough time to help them. And I think that can lead to a sense of personal failure, a sense of not being able to do what I feel like I should do.
Well, your storyline about this gentleman who you may or may not have helped, but where you felt very privileged to be present in that conversation, kind of underscores one of the key points here is when we talk about medicine as a profession, we do talk about it as a helping profession, and the discussion is about the helping of the people in front of us. In fact, that's crucial. That it's a sine qua non, and that's part of why Dr. Gooby, if we want to call him that, is so distressed, because he's not clear that he's actually helping people. In fact, he might be harming them with the things he does. So helping is absolutely key. But the thing that is not clearly stated usually is that this helping activity has to feel meaningful and important to you as a human being. I remember as a kid, I felt really good when I could help save the life of a bird, which I wrote down in my diary studiously at the age of 10. But when I went through college and began to see a whole bunch of different fields, I had a list of things that were acceptable to me. And I mentioned the entire list to my parents, both of whom are immigrants to the United States. And I said, I think medicine is good. I think they do being a therapist. I think I like political science. I think I could like being a social worker. I think I might want to be a psychologist. And they said, oh, that's great, but you're going to be a doctor. And, that's really what you have to do. And I was like, really? Yeah, because that's reliable income, and that's what you should do. That is the right thing, Stefan. It could have been a very dangerous move if other parents had made that move or played that hand with a different kid. But in my case, I actually liked a lot of stuff about medicine already, and I had liked the biology stuff I'd done. I just didn't like the organic chemistry. We have a whole episode on that. But I wound up doing medicine, and then I wound up in a high-end medical school thinking, wait, this is okay, but everybody is just going up an escalator here, and I don't really understand what's in this for me. What am I doing here? Am I just going to like go up an escalator and move through a set of stations? In fact, I remember one of my faculty mentors saying the whole purpose of this is so that you do this right so that you can get to the next station, which is going to be your residency. And then the one after that, which will be your fellowship. And if you do these things, you'll get to the right stations. And I remember feeling kind of hollowed out, like, what's in this for me? And that's actually the point of Dr. Abdal's video, which is that point after helping people is what's in it for me. And that's also the point of your storyline. It's like, I understand that you may very well have touched or helped the life of this individual patient, but you're not embarrassed to say that this moment you had with the patient really affected you and it really affected your day and it felt like a good day. It's not just that you like the guy, it mattered to you as a human being. And helping is a good thing, but it sits in relationship to this other thing, which is what's in it for me. How does it speak to who I am? Dr. Abdal in his video says what's in it for him is that what it really matters is teaching. He loves teaching. That's why he's on YouTube now. But obviously for you, in your story, and maybe for me, we get something back that we are trying to pin down and express. And I guess the obvious question that follows is there something about the way people select themselves into medicine or the way medical training occurs that hinders the discussion of what we are trying to obtain for ourselves?
I think this is a great question. You know, people enter medicine at a pretty young age, and they're being pushed into it by a whole bunch of signals. And as you said, it can be as
As was
much
I.
as yeah, as much as you can make a lot of money, you can have a lot of status, and some people go into it already hell bent on becoming something that they associate with high pay or status or whatever. And anyway, one of the videos that struck me was an interview with a 37-year-old guy who had gone into medicine at a much older age. In fact, I think he was 37 when he entered medical school. He was now older. He was now in his 40s. I think he was recently done with residency. But bottom line is he had come from a prior career as a flight engineer and then a biomedical engineer. And he talked about how going to medical school in his late 30s and being married had been brutal. And he had no idea quite what he'd been getting into when he did it, but he loves what he's doing. And he talked about the fact that, after having been in what he considered sort of the sterile world of engineering, that just the joy of walking into an exam room to see a patient who supposedly has a sore throat, the medical assistant reported this person has a sore throat. And all of a sudden, this patient is crying with concerns about anxiety and all sorts of things that are going on in the life. He felt so privileged to be there and to be able to have that type of interaction. And, it struck me that this was a guy who's much further along in life than the average person coming out of college or high school who's decided to become a doctor. He's been around the block. He's done something else. He knows what the options are. He knows who he is. And he sees the joy for him of certainly what I experience in medicine. And I think that your point is well taken that people come into medicine at a very young age. But I also think that the medical education process itself is somewhat toxic.
What I'm wondering is if we fail to show what it is that matters to us and makes us feel good about daily work. That's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously people coming into medical school are heterogeneous. There are quite a few people coming to medical school who have simply already decided that they want to make a lot of money and they want good status and they want a good lifestyle. And they'll put whatever in their personal statement they need to put in order to hide that. And that's pretty much why they're there. And unfortunately, that's one of the downsides of having a profession that pays so well and has such good job security. It's going to be attractive to people who are looking primarily for that. I think we have to be honest that's going to be a significant cohort of people who go into medicine.
Yeah.
So I think that's one problem. But I think there are a lot of other people who come into medicine who are looking for meaning, who are looking for something that will be fulfilling, and it gets squelched. They get buried under this brutal environment of that starts with all the multiple choice testing and the sort of culture of medical school, which is very hierarchical, which can be petty, which can infantilize them. And then they move into a profession where they are pressured as interns to be efficient, to be fast. And also, as a result of this process, they feel beaten down. They don't feel like there are any alternatives. They feel trapped. And that can lead into a depression, hopelessness, and a feeling that there's nothing to fight against. If they haven't learned to feel comfortable engaging with patients, being vulnerable, then they've lost that opportunity to find joy or it hasn't been cultivated in them. At some level, they know that they're missing out on something, but they don't know what it is. That's a recipe for unhappiness, for a sense of what people sometimes call moral injury. And that, I think, that's crushing. And again, I think when we watch these videos, we don't hear this talked about much. I mean, even Gooby is struggling to put words on it. He knows
Right.
something's wrong. He knows he was unhappy. He knows he wasn't doing right by patients. He was lacking the language to talk about how to push back, to find a path where he could still be a doctor, still be a neurosurgeon, but no longer feel like what he was doing was wrong. He doesn't quite know how to break out of that. He doesn't have the tools, the vision, and so he had to step away. And I think he's trying to figure it out now. Like I said, I hope he does, and I hope he goes back. But I think that's what we're not hearing about from most of these videos, or for almost all of them.
I mean, if medicine is about helping other people, there is a problem saying, now each of you medical students should be getting something emotionally rewarding out of this. Like, I mean, are we saying it should be rewarding to you emotionally to have served this patient? I can see a number of arguments against that. For instance, if I am really happy fixing broken bones after car crashes, I guess I could say I'm happy doing that, but it's not something about my relationship to the patient. I'm just take great satisfaction in putting the bones together and knowing that they're going to heal right because I'm darn good at it. By the way, that's definitely not me. But if somebody were good at that and they said, no, what I like is doing technical problems that I know in the long run people will get better from, that's fine. But it still seems a little at risk of being creepy to say, we want to make sure that you obtain maximum emotional pleasure from seeing these patients who are coming in to seek your help. It seems almost violative, doesn't it?
At my medical school reunion, I think it was my 30th reunion a couple years ago, I was talking to a woman from my class who became an orthopedic surgeon, who did fix a lot of bones and ended up quitting to become a ski instructor. And she's always a very good skier, and she loves being in the mountains, and she lives in an area where she can do that. And it was disgruntled. And so, how do I feel about that? Well, I think she made a decision, and I think it's great that she has the opportunity to do something she enjoys more. Obviously, it's a privilege to be able to walk away from medicine and become a skier or a ski instructor. It reflects the fact that she probably has a lot of money stocked away, and that's not surprising given what she was doing. And yet, my guess is that she was helping a lot of people by fixing a lot of broken bones.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I didn't get to dig in with her as to why she became so unhappy and gave
Yeah.
up.
We don't know.
One thing that I can speculate is that if you're just doing carpentry over and over again, even if you're helping people, eventually it just gets tiresome. And the joy in medicine is probably going to come from the relationships you have with the people you're caring for, because every person is in some degree unique. But that requires that you find some joy in that. I mean, again, if you're in primary care and you're taking care of people who have colds, not that that's all you do in primary care, but that's going to get old pretty quickly. So is adjusting medications for blood pressure and diabetes. But if you're getting to connect with people so that they can share with you things that they may not necessarily be comfortable talking about with other people, I don't know. I feel like there's something sacred about that. And I think that the ability to do that, the desire to do that, is something that I think has to be reinforced and cultivated through medicine and through medical training. And I do think that we push people in the opposite direction with all those multiple choice tests and that kind of gunner mindset that sort of sets them up for ultimately burnout and disillusionment, even if they're doing something that is extremely helpful and requires great skill for the people who they're taking care of.
I think there is something fundamentally necessary about saying, when you do this work, it will be hard. When you do this work, you'll make sacrifices. But when you do this work, it is going to be important to ask you yourself, and we need to help discuss it. Is there something meaningful and rewarding to you as a human being and as an emerging adult, if that's what you are, in doing this work? And where would it be? Where will it lie? It might be different for different people. We all go through, to some extent, stages of becoming a person. Somewhere in our teens and 20s, we're trying to figure out who we are in relationship to other people, what we can be and do that will make sense to us, and whether we'll be one who forms intimate relationships or who does not. But there's a problem to be solved about who am I? And in the medical profession, we don't train people to give them a sense of meaning. We don't do that per se. And yet it seems like the question has to be on the table. We have to be asking people, what's in this for you, beyond the fact that the profession itself is well regarded or that the pay is good. That seems to me a hard question to ask if the purpose is to help others, but it has to be front and center because a theme in these YouTube videos is I was asking what's in this for me? Who am I? And do I really want to be here?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that we have to emphasize, otherwise I think we just sound like scolds,
Yes, I'm
is
worried.
that I think a lot of a lot of the complaints are entirely legitimate. Physicians and particularly trainees, but physicians in general are often exhausted. They are put in situations where they're expected to do things that are impossible given the
Yeah.
time that they're allocated, and so they're not only exhausted, but they're often put in situations that are unrealistic, where they can't practice medicine with that they feel is safe, that they feel is standard of care. And I think my answer to that is you don't have to walk away from the profession and give up on medicine. You can fight back. You can say, medicine is too important. We need healers in our society. The way in which it's functioning, the way in which it's been perverted by profit, the way in which we are unable or unwilling or untrained or incapable of engaging in forming connections, those are things that need to change. This whole question of physicians not engaging with patients, not connecting with them, is not just a new phenomenon that one would link to the profit driven environment we're in. It goes way, way back. I've been reading a couple of books by a physician from the turn of the 20th century named Richard Clark Cabot, who came from a patrician, old money Brahmin family. And he was a pretty remarkable guy. He talked very candidly about his experiences actually running the outpatient clinics at Massachusetts General Hospital. I'm talking about way back in 1905, 1906. And he describes how poorly he and the young physicians he worked with often connected with patients. There's one episode where he remarks on how a man came in who was, I think, struggling with typhoid fever and was really sick and was basically begging for a glass of water, and how everybody sort of thought that was too trivial a thing for them to step in and provide. Everybody sort of said, oh, well, we give him a glass of water. He won't be thirsty now, but he's going to be thirsty later. So what's the point? Or maybe it can be taken care of by a nurse. And finally, a visitor went over and got this guy a glass of water, and the man felt immense relief. He also talks about how he himself tended to stereotype patients. And he describes at the beginning of the book how a Jewish immigrant came in, and immediately he, as a kind of patrician, saw this guy as a sort of Weasley prototype who he didn't feel much in common with. But then when this man started to talk about how he wanted to help his fiancee, who had tuberculosis and was planning on following her to, I think, somewhere in the Midwest, and wanted to know a lot about what he could do to help. And all of a sudden, the stereotyping that Dr. Cabot was doing starts to fall away, and he starts to see the humanity of this man. And it's so interesting that this is way back in 1905, that a physician is already talking about how much the way in which they're trained gets in the way of seeing the humanity of people, of helping them in small ways. The point is, it's not just a phenomenon that's new. Also, I think complaining about medicine is not new. When I was in high school, I recall being carpooled by a doctor who's actually a gastroenterologist, the dad of one of my classmates, who just said, medicine isn't what it used to be. I wouldn't want my son to go into medicine. And this is like in 1980. So I think we have to understand that this isn't all a new phenomenon. Some of this has just been amplified by social media. But I do think that the pernicious effect of capitalism that's kind of run amok has certainly escalated the problem. Um,
Maybe. Well,
Maybe. What I do think is somewhat new is the amount of money you can make by going into medicine.
in the
And
US,
in the U.S., exactly.
I mean, can we linger for a moment over the fact that you and I both watched a fair number of videos from the UK?
Yes.
I do think that's important. Like, so a meaningful percentage of the videos that just came up on search were from junior doctors, as they say, junior doctors in the NHS. And I remember, I remember one in particular where what was describing her passion for trying to do a good job for her patients and being overwhelmed by the sheer impossibility of doing it. She described patients waiting for 10 or 11 hours in what they call casualty, what we call the emergency department. She described being on duty with nurses coming up to her, asking her to answer for and fix things immediately while she is weeping uncontrollably behind her mask. And while she's crying because of the stress that she might do harm, people are saying, you've got to solve this now. You have to do this for me now. And she just couldn't hack it. And I've read enough from the UK to know that there are aspects of the National Health Service that are in deep trouble owing to a shortage of resources. I don't know exactly how to analyze that, but it could be that there's a meaningful percentage of folks, at least in the UK, who are not in the situation of making oodles of money. They're in situations where they can't do a good job because it's resourced wrongly.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you brought that up. I think the NHS, and again, I'm not an expert on the NHS, but just from watching a bunch of these videos, I really got a strong sense that the NHS is just grossly underfunded. I remember in one video, an inpatient doctor was talking about the fact that 5 of them had to share one computer to write notes on patients, and it was making it very difficult to do their jobs. And what was really pointed to me is this, with no irony, she said, I realize it's too much to ask that we should have more than one computer, but could we somehow work out a better schedule? And I was just like, oh my God, like that's the kind of deprivation that they're experiencing, where they think that having like more than one computer for 5 doctors is unreasonable and like too much to ask. And we don't have that in this country, as far as I can tell, for the vast majority of
Yeah.
places where people work. And and just having to see patients extremely quickly, I think that they were describing a situation that felt intolerable, where they were just being asked to do things that were completely unreasonable, and they were exhausted and they didn't feel like what they were doing is safe. And so that's why I feel like, in my view, we have to sort of acknowledge 2 things. One is a lot of what's on these videos is important and real. And that, I think, has to do with the system in which physicians are operating, where it can be miserable, can be exhausting. They're being asked to do things that are unreasonable, where they don't feel like they can practice medicine safely. I think that's the obvious message that one gets from watching these videos. I think the other side of it that I would like to emphasize is that medicine is too important to give up on, and that there is great joy and meaning and nourishment that can come from allying oneself with patients, and from recognizing that there can be, again, great meaning and great joy from the privilege of getting to have meaningful engagement, the kind you would never have, sort of the opposite of the cocktail party, if you want to think of the other extreme, with one person after another who often is hungry to be able to talk about things that they can't share with others. And that I think there's a paucity of both reflecting on that across these videos. And I think that there's a paucity within the whole training environment in talking about that and preparing people to be the kind of individual who can be genuinely present for people in a way that doesn't feel exhausting, but feels nourishing. And that's what I hope we can contribute with this conversation, which I think is necessary because what we're seeing on YouTube is just, it's missing that. It's too narrow.
My take home point that I'd like to emphasize, and I agree with what you said, but I would emphasize that the implicit in those YouTube videos is a question, which I think isn't always said explicitly, but sometimes is, which is, how is this going to be meaningful for me? And that's the right question. That's the right place to start when you're at a place in your life where you don't yet know who you are or what you are going to be for the long term. How is this going to be meaningful for me?
Yeah, and that what constitutes meaning, the universe of things that can provide great meaning in medicine, is bigger than the discourse that we're hearing, that the deeply personal dimension to being present and caring for others has to be part of that menu of options for what kind of meaning one can find by becoming a doctor. That seems so obvious to me, but it somehow falls through the cracks, and it needs to be said.
I'd like to offer a paraphrase of a quote from Viktor Frankl that I know has played a role for some people who've read him. The quote is, "You are unique, and no one in the world has your unique tasks to fulfill except for you." And it's something that Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who came out of the Holocaust, wrote in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. And I think it connects to this idea that each of us is unique and we have unique tasks. And somehow within any given professional structure, a lot is set out for us. But at some level, we have to find a way in which what we are doing answers the unique things that we can do. And I just wish that people will have support and running room to find that out within medicine.
And since you offered a quote, I want to offer one as well. Today we're recording this on the birthday of Martin Luther King. And so I'd love to close with one of my favorite quotes from him, which is, "Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others?"
Thank you very much, Saul.
Thanks, Stefan. We hope you've enjoyed this latest episode of On Becoming a Healer. If you have and you haven't already subscribed, please consider doing so now. Also, please rate us on the Apple Podcast app, as it will help others find us. And if you have a few moments, leave a review. In addition, if you'd like to make a comment about this episode, we'd love to hear from you. There are a couple ways to do that. If you're using the Apple Podcast app, then just open the episode website link and enter your comment there. Or you can directly go to the website contextualizingcare.org, select the podcast tab, and then scroll down and click on the episode. There you'll find the same comment box. Finally, you can always reach us at onbecomingahealer@gmail.com.